Brilliant. Let me make a start because we've got quite a lot to get through. I think most people do know me, but I'll just say who I am again. I'm Atiya Chowdhury, so I chair the Black Asian Minority Ethnic Network across Greater Manchester. And we do have network events. So this is one of our network events. We have quarterly big networking events, and in between that, we'll do other things like we are doing today. So this is our Meet the Funder event with the National Lottery Community Fund, which I'm delighted to be working with. It's a little bit of a different Meet the Funder event today. You will see. It's what I would call a Meet the Funder Plus. What we have been doing, been approached by the lottery and to look at how we can work better at a Greater Manchester level with them moving forward. And I'm really delighted we're doing this today so that they'll be able to get you informed about their current standard programs that are always there, which I think for our communities are absolutely key. So they'll be talking about those today. And they've got a whole team of people here with us today, which we're very fortunate to have their time. I will tell you who they are so that you know who's on call. And the other thing we want to do today with the National Lottery is to talk about and really have a conversation with them about what we think about the lottery, what our experiences are, what we think our barriers are, and what the barriers are for us, and look at that exchange so that we can take that forward and see how we can, at a Greater Manchester level, work better and perhaps help communities better to get through if there are barriers, how we address those. So that would be really, really important to begin that. So this isn't a one-off thing. We will continue to work, and the National Lottery will come back and tell us from taking back everything we discuss and raise today, to go back and see how they can work with us and develop some of that and come back and tell us what type of actions they can take and what has happened and what changes have happened, and if there is a difference on the outputs that we are looking at and the outcomes for our community. So this is a bit of a longer term relationship, I suppose, which I'm really delighted we're entering into. So I'm just going to say a little bit about who's here so that you know who's on call, and you know who's working in your areas or covering your areas. So I will introduce properly Cailen and Mandy shortly, because they'll be speaking about the funds that there are. But Cailen Kinney and Mandy Roberts are here with us. They're both funding managers with the National Lottery. Joined by them is a whole team of staff who you will meet when you go into your breakout spaces, because they will be there to have those conversations with you. So we have with us Tariq Mahmood, who is a funding officer for Greater Manchester. Welcome, Tariq. We've got Georgie Oliver, who is a funding officer covering Stockport and Tameside. We've got Kelly Duke, who's a funding officer covering Wigan and Trafford. We've got Rosie Meller, who's a funding officer from Lancashire. And we've got Anika Javed, who's a funding officer for Rochdale and Oldham. I hope I've covered everybody and said it all properly and rightly. I just wanted to say that because you'll see people here, and sometimes we don't know our funding office as well. And, that is one of the starters we've kind of said to the National Lotteries, that those relationships are really important. And, in terms of our committee, we want to have those relationships and know who we're working with and be able to approach. So that's all I'm going to say for now, other than use the chat box. We will have a large audience. We have, over 50 people here now. I know about 90 have registered, so people will be joining at some point during the course of this. But please use the chat box. We will have a very long session today, in the sense of quite a lot to cover. We will be doing a number of polls to just gauge your kind of opinions, if you like. We'll have a presentation from Cailen and Mandy about reaching communities and awards for all. And we will then have time for Q&A, so you will have time for questions and answers. We may not have enough time, and in case your questions aren't answered, please put them in the chat box and they will be picked up, and we will get them back to Mandy and Cailen and the team, and we will get the responses back. So if you want those questions answered, or if you want to have a meeting, please put that in the chat box. Use this as a space where you can do that, and the team can pick that up, and it'll be a start of a different type of relationship, which would be fantastic. And then we will have a presentation around, you know, why the National Lottery wants to do this now, why are we looking at equity and diversity and inclusion, why it's important for us. And then we will go in a breakout space, which will be your opportunity to meet some of the officers a bit more, and also say a little bit more about what you have had, your experiences of the lottery, any barriers that you've had, and what you think could be done better. So that would be great. And hopefully we will end on time at 12:30. So, right, I'm going to move on and bring in Cailen and Mandy. I think, are you doing it together, the presentation? So I'm really welcome. I've had a really good conversations with Cailen and yourselves, and I know you're going to speak particularly about two of your funds, because these are your standard programs, Awards for All and Reaching Communities. We're delighted to have you here, and hopefully this is going to continue to be a really good working relationship with yourself. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Satya.
Thank you.
I'll just share my screen now. So can everyone see that?
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Really great numbers. It's really exciting that so many people want to come. I think really interesting that we've got quite a few, sort of a third of people who've never applied before. So hopefully this presentation will be really, really helpful for you to understand a bit about our funding and our priorities. It seems like a lot of you want to apply, so hopefully this will help you as well. And those who are unsure, hopefully this will sort of support you to decide whether you think that our funding's right for you. So yes. So today we're going to be talking, as Atya sort of spoken about already, but within this presentation we'll be looking at our sort of vision and priorities as a funder, our funding offer, so Awards for All and Reaching Communities, who and what we can fund, how to apply. We're going to then have a Q&A, followed by then a sort of another bit of presentation on our approach to equity, diversity and inclusion, in particular our funding and approach around Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. And then we're going to have breakout sessions at the end where you can sort of talk a little bit more about the barriers. So yeah, we'll get cracking. So yeah, we're the National Lottery Community Fund, so we distribute funding from national lottery players. National lottery players contribute around £30 million to good causes every week, and we're the largest distributor of that funding. So we distribute around £600 million a year. In Greater Manchester, that looks like around £17 million per year, and we're currently supporting around 600 plus organisations across all of our funding programmes. Our vision as a funder, so our vision is around people in the lead. You may have heard this if you've ever looked at sort of our website. The idea is this sort of concept, it has a lot of sort of different meanings, but the idea is that we support organisations that are people-led, strength-based and connected. People-led, ensuring that people you work with are meaningfully involved in the development, design, delivery of your work. We think communities know best, and they know the issues in their area, they know our best place to sort of design some of the solutions. And so, yeah, we look for organisations which really try and meaningfully involve the people that you're working with in different stages of your work. Strength-based, supporting people and communities to build on the knowledge and skills and experience they have in the community. So if you're doing that people-led bit right, hopefully we'll be strength-based as well, really building on what already exists in the community, the assets that exist in the community. And then finally, sort of organisations that are connected, who understand what's going on in their local area, who are working in partnership, who are complementing what's going on elsewhere. Our funding priorities as a funder, so this is then what we're looking for within the projects that we fund, and generally this is how we'll be assessing a lot of projects, is on these funding priorities. The three funding priorities that we have are strong relationships, shared and sustainable places and spaces, and early intervention. So these priorities sort of came through discussions with grant holders, with stakeholders, with organisations across the voluntary sector. We asked them what was most important to them and where we added most value. And these are the three priorities. So yeah, just again, strong relationships, bringing people together, shared and sustainable places, improving the places that matter to people, and then early action to prevent problems and tackle disadvantage by empowering people to fulfill their potential and working to address problems at the earliest possible stage. So those were our sort of England priorities. They've been there for a while, but we acknowledge that we're also in a pandemic. We still are, as much as we're hopeful this sort of unlocking, which we're going through at the moment, is sort of a one-way path out. There will still be issues which will continue, and there are obviously no guarantees. It's hard to predict what's going to happen week by week. So we as a funder commit to continue to responding to organisations who are responding to the pandemic. So that includes people and communities most adversely impacted by COVID-19. We saw during the pandemic that certain communities, Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities, disabled people, were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And so we know that we have to provide additional support. We also want to support organisations to survive. We know organisations have been under immense financial pressures during the pandemic, but not just for survive, but to thrive and grow, to adapt, to become more resilient, to change. So yeah, as well as our sort of England priorities, we also continue to respond to the pandemic. Building upon that, and we will talk about this in depth, sort of, we've got a whole section on this after the Q&A, but as part of this is also prioritising equity, diversity and inclusion. We acknowledge that there's historic underfunding of communities, including Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, and disabled people and LGBTQ plus communities across the national organisation. In Greater Manchester, this is slightly more positive, which we'll talk about in a bit, but generally there's still loads more to be doing, and as a national organisation we haven't done enough. During the pandemic we did increase our funding into all of these areas, which we'll talk about a little bit again later on, but we intend to increase this further. In addition, as a local team, we're also a national team. We're looking to understand the barriers to funding further, which is a lot about what today's about and about the relationship that we're trying to develop with the Greater Manchester BAME Network to try and understand more of the barriers, to try and support the change in our process. So yeah, in those breakout sessions later on, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on that. So what is our approach as a funder? So we like to think of ourselves as open to all, flexible, proportionate and conversational. Communities come in all shapes and sizes, but the National Lottery Community Fund is for everyone. But we acknowledge that we're often not reaching everyone. We're not reaching into certain communities. Some communities don't think the fund is for them. So we need to do more to try and reach out, to try and make sure that our funding is inclusive and accessible to all. We are a flexible funder. This is a key part of our work previously, but something which we know we have to do a lot more of during the pandemic and now. There's different types of projects. There'll be sort of emergency sort of relief projects. There'll be sort of longer term sort of systems change projects. There'll be different projects and different lengths of time, and we need to be able to be adaptable to all those different things. Part of that is then being proportionate. So if you're coming in for a £50,000 grant, we shouldn't have the same approach as a £500,000 grant, and so we won't. We won't ask for the same amount of information, and we will try and be a lot more proportionate what we're doing. And then if you are funded, we will not ask for the same amount of information. We will try and have a more proportionate approach based on the level of funding. Finally, conversational. I will be honest, this is sort of more within our local reaching community, so that's £10,000 and above. Awards for All is managed by our central team. We get so many applications, it's quite hard to have that sort of more conversational approach. Our local team, dealing with £10,000 and above, we try and have conversations, we try and understand what's going on in the local area. We have local funding officers in each local authority. And yeah, we we try and not just take it on the basis of the written application, but also through conversation, trying to understand projects and organisations. So yeah, now I'm going to hand over to Mandy, who's going to talk you through sort of the awards for all and reaching communities and how to apply.
Morning, everyone. Just to kind of echo how wonderful it is to see so many of you here today. So thank you for being here, and I hope that this is the start of a really productive conversation between us all. Just to point out, everything that Cailen's gone through so far and everything that I am about to go through is available to you on our website. So don't worry if you don't get all of it down or some of it isn't quite clear enough. Hopefully we can make it clear, but it is all there on the website and you can talk to our local officers about it. So as Cailen briefly mentioned, we have 2 standard products that are open year round for you to apply for. The first is our National Lottery Awards for All, and the second is our Reaching Communities and Partnerships funding, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about both of those. But all applications for those should go through our website unless you have specific communication requirements. That's not to say you can't have a chat to us about Reaching Communities applications before you apply. You most certainly can. If you want to chat through your idea and how it fits with our priorities and so on, that's absolutely fine. But the application itself should come through our website. And next slide. I want to say next slide. I want to be like Chris Whitty. Cailen, let me say next slide, please. It's the only chance I get. National Lottery Awards for All then. This is our up to £10,000 pot. This pot is administered centrally in our Newcastle office. So this isn't administered by our local funding officers. You can apply for this at any time, but you can only have 1 award in any 12-month period. And the awards last for up to a year each. So it's up to £10,000 for up to a year. Again, applications are online, but you're only asked to answer 1 question. It comes back to this proportionate approach. These are only up to £10,000. And so you only have 1 question to answer. You'll get a decision on these typically within 12 weeks. Next slide, please. Reaching Communities and Partnerships then. This is the pot that is administered in regional teams. So our regional team covers the whole of the Northwest. And within that, then we have a dedicated team for Greater Manchester. I'm a funding manager within that team, Greater Manchester, and then we have funding officers within that team. We have an officer in every local authority area. And so you have a dedicated officer, depending on which local authority area or areas you're working in. We can fund individual organisations or partnerships with the Reaching Communities pot, over £10,000 and up to 5 years. For those grants, you can apply at any time also, and applications are online, but with other formats available if you do have specific communication needs. Important to say, what we can fund is not just new ideas for new projects. That is something we definitely can and we definitely do fund. But we can fund direct costs and project related costs for things you're perhaps already doing and want to expand, extend, or new ideas that you've got for new projects. We can also fund organisational development. So if you think there's ways that you want to strengthen your organisation, maybe your governance could do with some work, maybe you want to look at volunteering, maybe your safeguarding policies and procedures need more work, whatever it is about your organisational development to help you move forward and grow and be stronger, we can look at funding that for you too. We can also cover your core costs, your fixed costs. So things like your rent and your overheads, we can cover as well. They don't just have to be related to a project that you want us to fund. We can fund your core costs if that's something that's going to help you be more sustainable, grow, look for other sources of funding, etc., etc. So again, we can have conversations about that. We can also fund capital costs. Capital costs are for things like buildings, vehicles, and so on. We can fund costs for things like that. So again, please have a conversation with us about that. Next slide, please. This is a very high level version of how our process works. Essentially, you will apply online, check your eligibility on there. I'll go into eligibility very briefly in a second. You'll either receive an unsuccessful email from us, or we'll call you and request some extra information. There's a couple of points in the process that we might do that. So we might come back to you for extra information a couple of times. Once you've done that, you submit your extra information and meet with your funding officer. Again, it's good to say you may have already met with your funding officer in this process. You may have already spoken to us before you submitted your application. That's absolutely fine. This is just a kind of standard way that you would go through the process on this slide. Once that's all been done, we've confirmed with you that we've had your full proposal of exactly what it is that you'd like us to do, and you will then await a decision from us as to whether or not that has been successful, and you will be funded. Next one, please. So who can apply? You can apply basically if you are a constituted group of any kind. If you are a voluntary or community organisation, a registered charity, a not-for-profit company, any of those types of things you can apply to us for. There are slightly stricter rules around the reaching communities aspect than there are around the awards for all, just because we are awarding larger amounts of money over a longer time. And so we would look for you to be at least registered in some way with the Charities Commission and or Companies House, but we can talk to you a bit more about that if you're unsure. We can't accept applications from individuals or sole traders, profit-making organisations, organisations that don't have good or independent governance. You'll see the list of them there, and that list is also on our website. But again, you can talk to us if you've got any questions about that. Next one, please. So very briefly, when you apply online, you'll fill in a form that's about your proposal for funding. In essence, these are the questions that we're going to need you to answer on that form. We want to know who you are, what you're doing, where you're doing it, how your community has been involved in designing the work that you're doing, how they'll be involved in delivering the work that you're doing, who will benefit and the difference that you'll make to them, and obviously how much money you need, what you want to spend it on, and how long you need the money for. So that's your initial proposal for funding. It sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is. It's broken up into a number of questions on the website, which are quite straightforward to follow. But again, you know, we're more than happy to talk to you about those if you want a bit of extra support with them. And if your application comes through to us and you're eligible and we think it's going to fit well with our priorities, we'll ask you for more information. We'll ask for some more detail about your proposal than you've already given us, your proposed budget in a bit more detail, overview of your current financial position, and a recent bank statement. Also, we'll be asking you, there might be bits and pieces that we want to know more information about with regards to your project, and so we'll ask you for all that information at that point. Once we've got all of that, then your application will go forward to our panel for a funding decision. Next one, please. Safeguarding. If your proposal does involve working with children, young people, or vulnerable adults, it goes without saying that you need safeguarding policies and procedures in place. We won't give you advice on those safeguarding policies and procedures because we're not the experts. The NSPCC have got lots of useful information, as have the NCVO, the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, but also your local community and voluntary organisation support places like your local CVS or Action Together or whoever it is that you work with can give you lots and lots of advice on that. Our safeguarding policy is on our website when you apply, and you need to be able to comply with that in order to receive funds from us. Next one, please. So if you're successful, if you go to panel and you're successful, you'll receive an offer letter with us, which has all your terms and conditions of your grant on it. You get that back to us within 1 month, and you start your grant within 6 months of getting that back to us. We then have regular reporting that we ask you for. It might be 6 monthly, it might be annually, but at the very minimum, it will be the end of each year and at the end of your grant. We want to understand how you've involved people from your community in the delivery and the ongoing design of your project or your organisation, the difference it's made over that period of time that we're asking you to report on, what you're learning, and how you're spending the money. And we can chat to you then about, okay, if you've learned something that's telling you a part of your project isn't working quite how you thought it would, how can we change that? How can we adapt it? How can we perhaps move some money around if we need to? So there's plenty of flexibility within these grants as well once they're awarded. So that is a very, very, very quick whistle-stop tour of what we do and how we do it. Like I said, there is a lot more information on our website that you can have a look at, and you can come and talk to your funding officers or any of us at any point if you're unsure or you just want a bit more information about any of it. Our email address, Northwest Team, that you'll see there at the bottom, is probably the best one to use if you don't know who your local contact is or you don't have local contact details. If you email that, let us know where you're based. We can get your information to the right funding officer for you. Okay, and I think now we're going to take questions from you on that part of the presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mandy and Cailen. Do you want to take the presentation off, Cailen, now so I can see everybody? Which would be great. Right, we've got some time before we go into the next session to do some questions and comments if people want to ask any questions. So let's get going with that. I've got some questions in the box already. So there's a question from Helena from Global Arts. Helen, do you want to come in?
I prefer if you read.
I can answer the question. So the question's around, is it possible for awards for all unreaching communities to apply for both of these at the same time if they're for separate projects? The answer is yes, you can do that. So lots of different organisations will have awards for all at the same time as they're reaching communities. So whilst you can only have one awards for all at a time, you can have awards for all and the reaching communities. They do need to be for separate projects. We can't sort of double fund the same thing.
Excellent. I've got Anwar with his hand. I can see you, Anwar. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. My question really is obviously the pandemic has highlighted so many issues in all over the place in terms of the levels of help that is needed. From the lottery point of view, I know from experience, obviously funders are very inundated with applications from all over the show. In terms of this opportunity for Greater Manchester, for local areas, how open are we at this moment in time? Because I'm just conscious that obviously the programme's ongoing. Is there enough funding left priority-wise for all these local areas? And then my second part of that question was, are you encouraging just local bids, for example, let's say from Oldham, where certain organisations and around this table work across multiple areas? So would you encourage let's say Oldham, Rochdale to come together, or would you say actually keep it very local if you can, specific? So I'm just some guidance.
I'll take that one, yeah. We have an annual budget for Greater Manchester every year. We will come on to a bit more detail about specifically how we fund BAME organisations or other equalities in the next part of the presentation, but we do have a budget each year. It's approximately 14 million across the whole of Greater Manchester. And we split that budget down then to give indicative allocations across each of the local authority areas. And that's based on all sorts of things, demographics, areas of deprivation and so on. We use a number of measures to give us those indicative allocations. But each area then has its own allocation. And so in answer to your question, is there money? Yes, we are in a new financial year. We have our new £14 million budget and we have those allocations for each area. So yes, the money is there. What I would say is that we obviously always have many, many more applications than we have money for. And so we fund approximately about 25% of those applications that we get. And so if you are unsuccessful, it doesn't mean it wasn't a good idea. We didn't think it was a good project. It's just that there are perhaps other things that were stronger against some of our priorities, or it might be something that we funded quite a lot of recently, and we're obviously keen to spread our funding as much as we can. And then, sorry, what was the second part of your question, Anwar?
It was whether you would encourage, for example, instead of just a local area, for, as I used the example, just an Oldham bid only, specific to Oldham, but actually some of these issues across all boundaries.
Yeah.
So could we, could we come forward with, let's say, Oldham, Rochdale and Tameside, for example, or would you actually say that sometimes, and I've had a conversation with funders, they want you to focus into that local bit, and they're saying, you're kind of spreading yourselves a bit too thin if you're kind of covering everything. So it was just whether you're encouraging that, or, because like I said, I know from my own experience, it's very hard for me if I'm just doing a project in Oldham and then someone from Rochdale turns up to say, actually, sorry, I can't help you. I would never say that. I would just help them irrespective, but not count the output.
Yeah.
So it's just a bit of clarification there, please.
Yeah, absolutely. We absolutely can fund projects working in more than one area, and we do fund projects working in more than one area. Those indicative allocations in terms of our budget that I was talking about, we have a pot of money set aside specifically for projects that cover more than one area, multiple area projects. So when you say, would we encourage it? We would encourage it if you've got evidence that there is a need for your project in more than one area. If you can show us that you're not going to be duplicating the work done by other organisations in those areas, that you're well aware of what goes on in those areas, what the issues are, who else is working there, who your key partners would be. If you can demonstrate all of that to us, then yes, absolutely, that's something that we could look to fund.
Okay. Thank you. I've got quite a few people wanting to ask, and I'll bring them in this order. So I've got Joseph, I've got Wendy, I've got Mohammed, Salwa, Humaira, and Vicky. So if we could be quite quick with your questions, that would be great. So Joseph first. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Please, what sort of partnership will you advise? What sort of partnership framework will you advise for this kind of funding?
We wouldn't, is the brief answer to that. We wouldn't give advice on what is the best approach for you. The best thing I could do would be to advise you to seek advice from your local community and voluntary sector organisation on that. However, it doesn't have to be a formal partnership. You could have an informal partnership where you're simply working together on a set of outcomes, or it could be a more formal one where, for example, there might be a lead organisation that receives the grant funding and then distributes that to a number of other partners. So formal or informal routes are both perfectly possible, but we wouldn't advise you on what sort of structure is best for you as a group of organisations. That would be something we'd encourage you to seek advice from elsewhere.
Thank you so much.
I've got Wendy. I'm not sure whether Wendy's question might be more appropriate for the next bit, but I'll bring her in to ask it anyway. Wendy.
Hi, good morning. Thank you all for this opportunity. Yeah, I'd like to ask a question, please. In terms of Afro-Caribbean, what's the rate for success rate for the bids? And also, in terms as well, that, if you want doing a project, but it's not even about the project, it's about the building. How can you apply for funding for the building, and especially if it's our own building by the community, making that building a community hub? Will it be possible to apply for funding for that? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Wendy. I'll take those in reverse order. Perhaps Cailen can answer the second one about success rates, because I think we're going to come on to some of that in the second part of this. But in terms of buildings, yes, you can absolutely apply. That's one of those capital projects that I was talking about that would come under that. So, for example, we have projects for people who, like you say, want to take an old building and make it fit for purpose, fit for the community, accessible, and so on and so forth, or people who've already got community buildings and want to extend them. All sorts of projects are possible around buildings. So yes, absolutely. Cailen, do you want to pick up on the...
Yeah, sorry, I was just unmuting myself. I was just grabbing up some data on that. So we didn't actually include a breakdown of the sort of ethnic backgrounds because the data is just limited in how useful it is, because all the data is recorded by organisations who put in their own data. People put in multiple ethnic backgrounds, and it's really hard for us to then pull it out and make it sort of useful. So it's something which we're definitely trying to do more of. But just from looking at the stats that I had for a different presentation, for Afro-Caribbean, for African, it was 12% of awards during CCSF during COVID. For Black, African and Caribbean together, that was 7%. So around 20%, I'd say, but it probably could be more than that. It's just that some of the stats just aren't that useful, but that's sort of an estimate, I'd say.
Thank you. Thank you. Mohammed Sarwar?
Thank you, Atiya. Good morning, everybody. Just very quickly, we've been recipient of the community fund, and we've come to the end of the 3-year period. Last year was a very big challenge, especially for the BAME community as a BAME organization as well, to address the digital inclusion. And we worked very hard, and the community fund was very flexible. And I have to say, not because you're the funders, because you have been very flexible. You have given us the opportunity for sustainability and build the resources for the future. At the same time, in your presentation, because digital inclusion, everybody's at it, and they want to bring that forward. And BAME community is in the term hard to reach, are actually hard to reach because of the technicality. So there's lots of creative ways of developing ideas, whether it's videos, audios, etc., and then training people how to use it. There's so much has to be done. So in your presentation, there's not been much about, maybe it is there somewhere, about allowing digital inclusion to be promoted or adopted or supported. If you can answer that for me, please.
Yeah, sure. The only reason it's not there is because it's obviously one of many things that we could and do fund around. But it's, certainly something we are very aware has been highlighted by the pandemic, but obviously was there before. And it's certainly something that we would be interested in looking at in terms of funding. It's certainly something we can fund around digital inclusion. Yeah.
I mean, there are many, many things. That's up to the applicant really to try and make that case of the need and put that in, and then you get to a point where you might get to talk to the funding officer about that and develop that a bit more. Thank you very much. Humaira?
Hello, good morning, everyone, and thank you for having this meeting. I'm Humaira Haqqani from Let's Talk Rochdale, and we run, we provide, we have our own center, and we provide mental health through active support with activities and awareness on social issues. Up till now, I have never applied any funding, but up till now we bought our own place as well, and where we are running the center on completely family and friends support. So my question is, for applying the first time, what will be the procedure? And I need some details where I can apply, how can I go, and is there any person who can I contact, because I never applied, so I need a lot of support.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There's two things really I'd advise you to do, Humaira. One is get in touch with Action Together, who are your local community and voluntary sector support organisation. They will be able to give you sort of more general support around your organisation itself and the different pots of funding that are out there and what might be suitable, what your ambitions are as an organisation, how you're set up at the moment, etc., etc. However, you can, of course, also talk to us. Your local officer is Anika Javed, who's on this call today, but you can have a look at our website. We'll share the slides with you that we showed earlier. Our website is on those slides. I will also put it in the chat. And you can email our Northwest team inbox, and that will get through to Anika. But we'll share all of our local officer details with you after this meeting as well. So those are the two routes. I think us to talk specifically about our funding, come and speak to us, have a look at our website. For more general advice about your organisation and how you want to develop, I would go to Action Together.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Vicky Lee?
Hi. Apologies if you might have already touched on this, but I've just been asked to ask, can we apply for a bigger grant while we still have a small one?
Yes, you absolutely can, as long as they're for different things. We can't fund the same thing with both pots, but if they're for different things, then yeah, 100%.
As in like different projects, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Different projects, or one might be more project based, one might be more organizational development, core cost based, whatever that is. As long as they're for different things that we're funding, then yes.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to kind of move on. I can see lots of people had their hands up. I would suggest if you could put your questions in the chat box, they will get picked up either during today if we get more time, or they'll be picked up by the team after and they can get back to you if you leave your contact details. For those of you who've still got your hands up, if you could lower them, that would be great, so that I've got an idea of the next session. And also to say, when we go out into the breakouts, I have been looking at the chat box, and some of your questions are probably more appropriate for breakout conversation. So you will have the opportunity to speak to the funding officers in the breakout and have a bit more time there to get into the detail of your concerns and your questions. I'm going to move on now and go back to Cailen and Mandy to talk a little bit about your kind of plan now in prioritizing equity, diversity and inclusion, and why we've started this journey with this event today. So over to you, Cailen.
Yeah. Mandy?
Yeah. Okay. I just noticed in the chat as well, someone had said they were a little bit late because they've been fasting. I just want to say an extra special thank you to everybody who is here today who's observing Ramadan, because we have 2 members of our team who are observing Ramadan, and I met with them earlier and they are so tired. So thank you to everybody, especially who's observing Ramadan at the moment. I can't imagine what it's like. Okay, so yeah, we're going to talk now about how we are prioritizing equity, diversity and inclusion. We're going to give you a brief overview now, but obviously this is something we're going to want to talk about more in the breakout rooms. Following today, we will also be sending you a survey to complete. Really encourage you to complete that survey. Please do. The more responses we get to that survey, the better. It will go into more detail than we are able to do today. Someone says Ramadan's good for health, and that's what Tariq, my colleague, was telling me actually, and yeah, I think I'm gonna have to explore that a bit. So yeah, that survey will go into more detail than we're able to do today in the breakout rooms. So it's complementary to the breakout rooms rather than instead of, so please do complete it. Okay, so if I can have the first slide, please, Cailen. So why do we need a new approach to equality, equity, diversity and inclusion? The reason that nationally, across our national Reaching Communities and Awards for All funding, our support for BAME communities is as low as 6% in some areas, which isn't good enough. Number of applications received from LGBTQ plus communities were less than 1%, which again is not good enough. And 12% of our awards were reaching organisations supporting disabled people, which again is not representative, is not good enough. In addition to this, what we know from our customers is that groups with protected characteristics often have lower levels of satisfaction when it comes to applying for our funding, and are often telling us that they feel they're experiencing more barriers to funding than groups without protected characteristics. So what have we done so far to try and address this? During the last year, we put £1 million into a particular pot called the Phoenix Fund, which was specifically for emergency grants during the pandemic for Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. However, we went further than just putting that money into a pot and giving it out. We included people from those communities in the decision-making process. It was people from BAME communities that made the decisions about where that money went. That's quite revolutionary for us. And it's something we're keen to build on and move forward with. That was a bit of an experiment with the Phoenix Fund, which will continue. And it's something we want to do more of, because we do fully recognise 100% that our funding, the people who make the decisions within our fund, are not representative of all communities. We fully accept that, and I'm completely open and honest about that. We've also appointed a head of equity, diversity and inclusion to look at how we work internally in terms of things like the representation of our funding staff, but also how we work externally and how we reduce some of those barriers that people experience in applying for our funding. And one thing which I wouldn't be surprised at all if it comes up today is the very good point that everything on our website is in English and Welsh, and that's it. So it's things like that that we need to start to look at. What we also did during the emergency funding period last year was had a focus on marginalised communities and communities of interest as that relate to the protected characteristics. So under our emergency funding, 18% of the awards that we gave across the country went to organisations specifically supporting Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. And I did see a question pop up in the chat about how do we ensure that those are led by people from those communities. And that's something we do definitely look at around our people in the lead that Cailen was talking about earlier. We want to fund communities that are led by people who come from the communities they serve. It's really important to us, and it's something that we are definitely a lot better at than we used to be. Awards to organisations supporting disabled people went up from 12% to 24%, again, very encouraging. And awards to organisations supporting LGBTQ plus communities went from 1% to 2%. Not amazing, but still an improvement. So that's what we've been doing nationally. And Cailen's going to talk a bit more now about the local picture in Greater Manchester.
Thanks, Mandy. Yeah, so I'll just talk a little bit about what we've been doing in Greater Manchester. So the first thing to say is this picture is incomplete. It does not include, unfortunately, some of the awards for all data. I know from the survey, a lot of you have just applied for awards for all. And so it really does highlight to us how we need to get better at understanding all of our data. The issue is that when people put in beneficiary data when they're applying, it's all from the organisation who do it. And it's very, very inconsistent and unreliable. And the data is really, really poor. So with reaching communities, because we've got a local team who've got local relationships with every grant and every organisation who has a grant, then we're able to sort of speak with those organisations more, understand more, and so therefore we can sort of check that data and make sure it's reliable. So that's why we're sort of talking specifically about £10,000 and over. But yeah, hold our hands up that we definitely need to do better with the awards for all data. So total reaching communities grant live funding in Greater Manchester totals around £47.2 million, which is around 47.2 million across 202 grants. We're currently funding 37 grants that are targeted at a particular ethnic background, which is worth £9 million. So that's 18% of our grants. This is sort of an increase from pre-pandemic and does not include the sort of COVID emergency funding, which has now come to an end. So yeah, is this level high enough? So 18% of grants. I think the census for Greater Manchester in 2011 showed that ethnic minority groups was around 11% of the population in Greater Manchester. We did 10 years ago, so we'd expect that to have changed and increased. But also, I don't think it's just appropriate to just look at percentage of the population and try and match that to grant size. We know that COVID-19 and everything around that has really highlighted to us and the existing inequalities. And so we're aware that certain communities need greater support. So being an equitable funder is acknowledging these inequalities and barriers and providing additional support to communities. We suspect that, that we may be funding the same organisations sort of quite regularly as well, and not funding as many new organisations and our reach into certain communities is quite poor, we think. So that's something which we can definitely improve. And as I said, this is just reaching communities and not awards for all, where we've got a local team, where we're building local relationships. And so the data probably is better here. So there's still definitely issues, there's definitely still barriers, there's still lots more for us to do. We do think this is sort of an okay level, and we're sort of happy with what we're doing, but we definitely need to improve. I'll shoot through the slides. I think we are running out of time. This is just to show our grants during the emergency period. So we had a grant funding with the government, and we awarded 197 grants, totaling 8.5 million. And of these, 38% of them were targeted at a particular ethnic background, which we're really happy with. 38%, I think that level is potentially not the most sustainable, but we hope really showed that we were committed to being a quite equitable funder during this period where we needed to reach communities who are most hit by the pandemic. And that's why we sort of really tried to push and focus on trying to get as much out as possible to those communities. So yeah, there's still lots more work to be doing, as Mandy sort of mentioned as well. There's consistent issues that are coming up. Lack of confidence from organisations due to consistent rejections, not necessarily knowing why they're being rejected, not good enough feedback from ourselves around those reasons. So organisations feel like they're just going through the same process over and over again. Concerns over the inclusivity of the application process. Mandy's touched upon our sort of website, but also the language that we're using, the fact that a lot of it does come through a website. Is it as inclusive as it could be? Historic underfunding for organisational development. It feels like there's a lot of organisations who maybe are struggling with capacity around sort of impact measurement, demonstrating their impact around sort of what their sort of sustainability is, or just the size of organisations, where it seems like there's been less capacity support for organisations. And then as a funder, we hold our hands up. There's definitely not enough diversity and representation in our decision making, which is why we tried to push for the Phoenix Fund and went for the approach that we did there. So there's definitely big longer term pieces of work to do. The sort of quick wins, and we sort of commit that all Greater Manchester Black, Asian and minority ethnic led organisations will receive a phone call prior to assessment and feedback phone call if unsuccessful. So hopefully we can try and build understanding both from our sides of the projects, so we can have better understandings of what applications are coming in, but also from the organisation's perspective, understanding our priorities and the reasons why we've said no. Sometimes our feedback is criticised for being a bit generic, and we will always try, well, we will try and be as specific as we can when we can be. Sometimes it is difficult because we're having to say no so many times. And sometimes an organisation, the project is good, it's just that there's other projects which were stronger. But where we can, we will try and give feedback. And then the other thing is just what we're doing today, the commitment that we want to try and understand more. We want to try and speak to as many organisations as possible to understand the barriers to funding. We've got that survey, which Mandy mentioned, which we'd really encourage you to complete. And then we've got these breakout sessions now, where we'd really want you to be as honest as you can be with us. And from there, we can then take that information, feed it into the national organisation, our local team, and try and start to shift our processes and make them more inclusive and accessible.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you, Cailen. So we're going to go into breakout sessions in a minute. So they're going to look at two key areas. What are the main barriers you have experienced when applying for funding, and what can funders do to make the process of applying for funding more inclusive and accessible? So you'll have about 20 minutes in breakout. Just before we go in there, just a couple of things on that session, Cailen, to take on board. So I know there's been things in the chat box as well on this, is the data around success and unsuccess at a district level is quite important rather than just GM and Northwest level, because, and also, you know, in terms of successes, for example, it may be that, you know, there's more success in Manchester than there is in Wigan or Rochdale. You know, those sorts of things are quite important for us in terms of equity and need across there. And just for people to know that, you know, the Phoenix Fund was a great initiative. We at GM level have been involved with the development of that, and we're part of that development from the GM Black and Asian Minority Ethnic Network. And two of our members who are here, from Barbara from Mama Project and Charles from Khan, were both on the panels national for the decision making as well. And I know that there is a report coming out from there about what the impact of that Phoenix Fund was. and that would be quite important to share, because again, I think for us was, how did Greater Manchester groups benefit from Phoenix? And that's the data we're quite keen on looking at. So I'll leave it at there.
Sorry, Atia. Just
Yes.
before we disappear, sorry, just two very quick things. There's lots of requests coming in the chat for us to share email addresses. I will share all of our email addresses after this event, so be reassured. Secondly, there's quite a few questions coming in, like you say, about data and stats. When we go into these breakout sessions, there might be questions you have that we can't answer straight away today. It's fine, we will take those questions away and we will come back to you with answers for them. But yeah, please just be kind to our officers. They might not be able to answer absolutely everything that you've got for them today, but we hope it's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, it's a conversation we're having, and so we want to share and understand what the concerns and issues are for everybody. Brilliant. So you will now go into your breakout spaces, have a good discussion, and we'll see you back in the main bit here in about 20 minutes.
Did we come out?
Yeah, Florence, I've got what you said. Thank you. Sorry.
Right, I think everybody's coming back. They've probably been cut off midstream of their conversations.
Yes, we were we were pushed out in a funny way anyway.
Brilliant.
I think everyone's back in now, Atia.
They are back in. Hopefully, brilliant, everybody coming back. What I thought, I was in one of the breakouts, and I think what I found was extremely useful conversation and discussion in there. And probably we could have done with a whole hour on that. So, one feedback really is to look at how we might do more of this, actually, maybe in smaller groups, because I thought that the feedback was excellent. I don't know if Cailen or a couple of your officers want to say anything at this stage. I'm sure we've got a couple of minutes to do that.
Yeah, so I think some of the rest of the funding officers and the team are going to send me some messages, and I'll sort of feed some stuff back. I think to echo what you said then, Atia, I think we sort of spoke about the first question around the barriers. There was loads of amazing discussions and really insightful conversation, and just nowhere near enough time. I think it's really difficult when on Zoom, because we don't want to have really, really long meetings, because we recognise that it's quite difficult and quite tiring. But I think maybe there is something about, if people are interested, maybe having some sort of smaller group sessions which are really focused on some of these things, if people were interested in that, because I do feel like we could have got a lot more from that. I think some things which came up in our group was similar things that we've already spoken about around not getting enough feedback, not really knowing necessarily the reasons why being unsuccessful. I think there was something really interesting around the fact that it's a lot of the time it's these small organisations which need the support, and they're often the ones which need longer term funding. It can't just be a 1 year awards for all. They need to be having small funding but over multiple years, and yet when we hit the sort of multiple year funding, it becomes a lot more complicated, and they find it a lot more difficult and find it a lot less accessible, and the success rates go much lower. So that was sort of the stuff which came from my group. Similarly, Tarek from his group, he sent me a message just saying that more support and information for a process for new organisations, so really focusing on sort of new organisations. So I guess similar to from my group around smaller sized. Anika's also mentioned videos to talk through the application process, not always just written format. Could we make it more accessible that way? From Mandy's group, she said, need to know who to go for advice and support on setting up and developing your organisation. So more infrastructure support. I think that's really come up. It came up in our group as well around support for organisations to understand what structures they should be operating as, and how to apply for funding. I think definitely something which is coming up. People find it hard to articulate on paper, make it more widely known that we can help with the application, have more of a conversational approach. I think often, generally, the sort of the standard is that we just get written applications and we just assess them that way. There are ways that we can sort of support organisations more in a more conversational way, and maybe that's something which we need to make more organisations aware of. Also, some more of these sessions, more visibility for us. I'm not sure if that means more of the sessions as in the whole funding presentation or the breakout sessions, but that was one of the feedbacks. Organisations aren't confident with the process, and people would like to see specific BAME presentations like this, but in local areas as well. More languages needed on websites, so that's similar to what we've already spoken about. Yeah, more feedback and communication during the assessment and after if successful, so that's something which we know we're trying to improve on. Yeah, more hand-holding and guidance as people find it hard to put down on paper their project. Again, I think this leads into the infrastructure stuff as well. We do have to manage our expectations on how much hand-holding we can do and how much time we can spend with each organisation. We commit to having that sort of conversation with you before and after. And if we can, we will do more. But generally, a lot of these conversations, I think, are more around how else it can be supported through infrastructure. Maybe that's a conversation which we need to have at ATIA as well.
Yep.
So yeah, lots more. Organisations really appreciate one-to-one support, more of this to build relationships, regular meet the funders, video call options, more visits to organisations is something which we definitely are excited to do more. Whenever we can, we will be doing that. Further work needed for certain organisations which won't apply for ethical reasons. So yeah, that's definitely something which we should be thinking about a little bit more. So yeah, loads of really, really important points.
It might be quite useful to put something together on everything that's come together from out of this and the kind of questions that have come out, for the next stage of this piece of work. And I think from my kind of listening into the breakouts, I think we need to be quite clear about what the expected role in terms of support is from yourselves, as opposed to infrastructure bodies outside and others. And what's coming out clearly is the Pacific. Is there a Pacific need for our community's infrastructure support that we're not getting from somewhere, whether it's a funder or an infrastructure body? We need to pin that down. And what type of specialist programs of support do we need? And there's quite a lot of need around the pre-application process, where people are starting to think about ideas and want some of that conversation to discuss those ideas and how to frame those things before thinking even about putting an expression of interest in. So quite a lot, I think, in terms of understanding how we move forward. So I'm going to bring this to a conclusion. I think it's been a really useful event for us. I'm going to say thank you so much to all of your team, Cailen and Mandy. It's been an excellent event, I think. What we have to think about is, I think if it had been normal times, we would have had a whole morning on this, which is what our network event would have been, with a lunchtime of nice food and more networking and talking to you all. So there would have been loads of opportunity for everyone to have a conversation with you. We're rather restricted on Zoom, and we've restricted even 1.5 hours, thinking, can we keep people, here for an hour and a half, particularly for some of us who are fasting. But it's been excellent. Everybody stayed on, and I think the poll results are quite useful in terms of where people have shown their interest and what's happening on there. I think overwhelmingly, quite a lot what's coming out is better understanding of who's getting funding where and where those gaps might be, what we can do around all of that, but also more about support. I think you can see from our sector that we are a very growing sector, very diverse sector, and there are many new organizations amongst us, new to funding and new to this area of work, and need for support, and the way that we work. And I think this is nothing new for us in the way that we like working and we need working, is one-to-one support and small sessions and help with all of that, which I think has been a bit of a miss within the sector overall. So I think a lot of those things are important for us. I find it really valuable having these Meet the Funder events, but this one's been a special one, which is starting to have a better conversation so that you're not coming and going. We're going to keep on working with you, which is great. We will have some other events around this funding as well. I'm very aware that for our sector and for all the community voluntary sector, moving forward through a very difficult year has been very difficult, and we've had lots of emergency funds put to us and for the communities over this emergency period, which may not be available anymore, and that we're moving forward with possibly a more difficult environment around us, less funding, more competition, and the need for more help. So I know that is kind of where we're heading. So we really, as a GM network, we really need to focus on that in supporting our members around this. There is other funds that are coming along. We are planning another Meet the Funder with Khan and their success in bringing Global Majority Fund to Greater Manchester. That's through Comic Relief, so they will be launching that soon, and we'll be organising a webinar with them like this in May, probably mid-May, so that you can get a bit of an idea about that fund across GM being available to you all to apply for. I would also urge you to go on to the Comic Relief funding and see who all the other intermediary partners are for Comic Relief who have been successful as intermediary partners to distribute the global majority funds, because you may be able to apply to them. They may not be in Greater Manchester, they may be other national organisations, but you can access that funding too. And of course, the other fund that I'm still pushing is Voice for Change, another national organisation. We've been pushing that they've got the Windrush Fund that some people may want to apply for. So there's just some of the things that are coming up, and there's lots of other things going on that we will try and keep on bringing on. But it's really important that you join as members of Greater Manchester BAME Network, so that you keep on getting the information from us, because we will put that out to you all through the newsletters and the website. So I want to thank you all for all the time that you've given this morning. And, this won't be the last conversation. It's the first conversation with the National Lottery Community Fund. And we will get back to you on this and continue to work on that. And thank you very much again, Mandy and Cailen, for working with us on hosting this and for facilitating and being here and really committing yourselves to bringing some change to Greater Manchester, to our communities. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very nice.